It's so nice you're all here today. When we bury someone who's 98 years old, her contemporaries are gone. So it's us who carry her memory. And I know you'll hear from Rabbi and so many people, and we all have a very special place in our heart for Ida. Ita Leah. Sing a little piece of Eshet Chayil and then the 23rd Psalm. Eshet Chayil mimetza verachok mipninim michra batach balev bala v'shala מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בנות דשא ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינעלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני ומגלה צדק, אוי למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגץ על מוות, לא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי, שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, תשענת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה, אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar bino deshe yarbitzeni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kerachem av al banim richem Adonai al yirei av, ki hu yada yitzreinu zachor ke'afar anachnu, enosh kechatzir yamav katzitza sadeh ken yatzitz, Ki ruach avrabo ve'enenu lo yakirenu od mekomo. V'chesed Adonai me'olam ve'adolam al yirei av, v'tzidkato livnei vanim. As a father has compassion for his children, Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are but dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over them, and they are no more, and no one can recognize where they grew. But the Lord's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children, to all the reverent ones, endures age after age, unchanging. The words of Ecclesiastes, Lakol zman ve'et lachol chefetz tachat hashamayim, et laledet ve'et lamut, et latat ve'et lakor natua. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for dancing and a time for birthing and a time for dying. The proverb reads, "A woman of valor who can find? Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and nothing shall he lack. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. She opens her hand to the needy. She is robed in strength and dignity and cheerfully faces whatever may come. Her children come forward and bless her. Her husband too, and praises her. Many women have done superbly, but you surpass them all." Ida Garnek was a woman of valor. She sustained a loving marriage to Morris for almost 70 years. She raised 3 loving children, Tilly, Sam, and Joe, and welcomed Howard into the family as her own. She was a committed Jew. She had many friends in our community, many of them who are here. She and Morris were regulars at our Saturday morning services, together with Tilly and Howard. Despite hardships when she was younger, she lived a long and fulfilling life. She was a dear woman. We will miss her greatly. Much of this eulogy, which I'm about to recite, was prepared by Tilly, and I so appreciate her putting all of these beautiful words together for her mother. Ida Kahn was born in 1923 in Poland, a suburb of Lodz, to Zanvil and Tilla Kahn. They were an observant family, and she was always proud that her father was a Kohen and would do the duchening in front of the congregation. Zanvil had to go to work at an early age, and she remembered that they encountered anti-Semitism as an ongoing part of their lives. But she often said that her most significant memories were of home and family. Her family did not have a lot of money, but was rich in Yiddishkeit and Jewish tradition. Yiddishkeit was the most important part of her family's life, and she spoke of helping her mother prepare for Shabbos and celebrating Shabbos and the holidays with her parents. Her 4 sisters, and her brother. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, she fled her home with her older sister Chaya, and her older brother fled as well. She spent the war with her sister first in hiding, and then in Russia, where she worked cutting down trees and other forced labor. She never saw her parents or her 3 younger sisters again. During the war, she and her sister were often cold and didn't have adequate clothing, and there was never a time that they weren't hungry and praying for the war to end. After the war, she met Morris, and they were married in 1946. They lived in a displaced persons camp in Salzburg, Austria, where Tilly was born, 1949. In November 1951, they came to the U.S. and settled in Cheyenne, Wyoming. But they heard that there was a larger Jewish community in Denver, so in June 1952, Ida and Morris and Tilly moved to Denver's west side, where Sam and Joe were born and where they lived until 1971, when they moved to Hilltop and became East Siders. Ida and Morris came to us with little money, few possessions, and no knowledge of English, but they worked hard to make a life for themselves and for their children. Morris worked originally at a factory, while Ida stayed home and cared for the children. When his factory went out on strike, Morris, who had never been in a bar before in his life, went into the bar business. And later, Ida worked with him for many years until they retired and were able to enjoy life more and travel with their daughter Tilly and son-in-law Howard. They traveled to Europe and Florida and Las Vegas and California and went on several cruises together. Their latter years were very happy until Morris died in 2015, just 2 weeks short of his 97th birthday and 6 months short of their 70th wedding anniversary. Ida was a wonderful wife to Morris and a great mother to her children. She saw to their Jewish educations and provided them with a Jewish household. Morris and Ida kept kosher, and after Morris retired at the age of 62, he and Ida went to shul every Shabbos, first at Beth Joseph and then at the Alliance, where we would see them each week, sitting around there in the middle. They had a place of honor among us and celebrated their milestones, their birthdays and anniversaries on our bima. They loved the services at the Alliance and particularly enjoyed the people at the Kiddush each week. For decades, Ida would cook for the whole family a Shabbat dinner every Friday night. Ida would cook for Morris as well every night. It was her pleasure to do so and to take care of her husband all through the years. Her tender, loving care no doubt added years to her husband's life. We will hear more in just a moment from Tilly and Howard. But suffice to say, and we all know this, Ida lived a good life. We ask that God bind Ida Garnek in the bonds of eternal life. May she now rest in peace. Amen. I'd like to call upon Howard and Tilly to please come forward to say a few words.
What's the matter?
Make it so you can hear me.
Close to. You can
Take it off, yeah. I've worn the HEA mask for the entire pandemic, one of them, and so I'm going to continue to wear it today. In Wasser und Feuer wollte sie gelaufen für ihr Kind. Into water and into fire she would run for her child. Those are the words to one of my mother's favorite songs, A Yiddish Mama, a Jewish mother, that exemplifies everything that is good and positive and giving and nurturing about a Jewish mother, my Jewish mother. My mother was 16 years old the last time she saw her own mother, Tilla, of blessed memory, after whom she named me. But she always remembered what her mother had taught her. So often she would say about observing holidays or cooking or kashrut, or even about teaching her children good table manners. This is the way my mother did it, and this is the way I do it. But there were so many things that she, as a Yiddish mama, just seemed to know to do naturally. When my parents and I first came to Denver and lived on Hooker Street, next door to the Karsh family, there was a library about a block away. A few years ago, we found a library card with my mother's name on it. When I was still too young to read, and my mother had not been in the United States long enough to read very well, she was checking out library books. She would have me read to her. She instinctively knew that this was the right thing to do, and it instilled in me a love of reading and books that I have, of course, carried with me my entire life. My mother was always so proud of my father that he was smart. He was so good at math, and he could add columns of numbers faster than we could enter them into a calculator. She was also so proud of her children because we were good students. but she was too humble to realize that she was smart in different ways. I'm going to be leaving a paperclip alone. My husband says I leave paper clips all over the house. She had talents that she just took for granted that I, who did not inherit them, just marvel at. She was mechanically inclined and she could fix things. She taught herself to sew and crochet and do needlework. She always altered and shortened clothes for all of us in the family, and she always finished them as if they were professionally altered. And this was especially challenging with my father and me, since we had one arm and one leg that was shorter than the other. She sewed beautiful beading on my wedding dress and my veil. One of her most precious possessions was her Singer treadle sewing machine that she brought from Europe. As long as I can remember, and to this day, that sewing machine was covered with a cloth that contained her stitchery of colorful flowers. When I was 12 years old and starting junior high school, and Sam was about 8 and Joe was 3, my dad, as the rabbi mentioned, who was working at a factory, went out on strike. And my mother went to work at what we called then Schwader Brothers, or Samsonite. She worked the swing shift, and she went to work at about 3 in the afternoon and came home at about 1 in the morning. But every day before she went to work, she prepared our dinner, cleaned the house, did the laundry, and she still found time to go to PTA meetings and take Sam and Joe and me to Elitch's and Lakeside amusement parks. That boundless energy, coupled with her independence and strong will, continued into her later years. Even after she broke her hip at the age of 89 and had to use a cane, she did not slow down. And she always told people, I don't use a cane because I'm old. I use a cane because I broke my hip. Well into her 90s, she cooked and cleaned and did laundry. And most importantly to her, again, as the rabbi mentioned, she continued to go to shul almost every week, and she enjoyed so much having her many friends come over to her and talk to her. And on one last personal note about my mother's favorite color was purple. She loved it, and it loved her. Whether she was wearing a simple purple top to go to a doctor's appointment, or her beautiful beaded purple outfit that she wore to weddings, she always got compliments about how beautiful she looked in purple. And she always responded, I like purple. And finally, I've often been at funeral services where I would hear the family speak about and thank their loved ones' caregivers. Can't believe that's the part that makes me cry. But you don't really appreciate what that's all about until you experience it. For the past 2 to 2.5 years, my mother has been loved and cared for by 4 amazing women. So my brothers, Sam and Joe, and I would like to thank Renee and Kiasha and Jamie and Brickty, who treated my mother as if she were their own mother and made it possible for my mother to continue to live in her own home as independently as possible until almost the very end. I can't believe that's the part. Sorry.
I have been blessed with 2 Idas in my life. My own wonderful mother, Ida Garnek, who raised me and loved me and cared for me for the first 18 years of my life. And my wonderful mother-in-law, Ida Garnek, who joined my mother in loving me and caring for me over 50 years ago. From the very beginning, Ida, along with her husband Morris, accepted me into their hearts and considered me their son. And almost from the beginning, they were mom and dad to me. And just like every Jewish mother, Ida's greatest joy was in cooking for her husband and her children. Her favorite dish to make for me was her matzah brie. When Tilly and I lived near Ida and Morris, she would occasionally call me and ask me to fix something for her or do something for her. And at the end of every request, she would say, "And when you finish, I'll make you a matzah brie." One Thanksgiving, Ida and Morris and Tilly and my brother-in-law Joe and I decided to go to our favorite buffet for a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, which for Ida, by the way, was of course fish. We always went to dinner at 6:30 to arrive by 7 p.m. But when we got to the restaurant on Thanksgiving, the restaurant had already closed for the day. No Thanksgiving dinner. What to do? Well, of course, we all went home and Ida made matzah brie. And speaking of food, in the late 70s and early 80s, I owned a restaurant called the New York Kosher Dog. And my mother, Ida, moved to Denver to help me run the restaurant and brought with her her recipe for her fabulous potato knishes. My mother-in-law, Ida, came to work for me in the restaurant as well. The two Idas got along wonderfully, and when my mother had to leave Denver for health reasons, my mother-in-law took over and made the knishes. She always told everyone, "Howard's mother taught me how to make the knishes," but she never told anyone that after my mother left, my mother-in-law actually invented a shortcut for making the knishes that resulted in the same delicious taste but cut the preparation time in half. My mother-in-law was humble and kind and loving. She defied every negative mother-in-law stereotype. My own mother passed away in 2012, but I know she always knew that although I was far from home, I was loved and cared for. And finally, my mother-in-law always wanted me to learn to speak Yiddish, but that wasn't going to happen. But for my in-laws' 60th wedding anniversary celebration, I learned the words to a Yiddish song called "Vus gewein is gewein," and sang it to them. The song is actually a somewhat sad and nostalgic song about the passage of time and the inability to bring back the past. But nothing made my mother-in-law happier than to hear me sing the song to her. So for my mother-in-law, Ida, here is "Vus gewein is gewein." Vus gewein is gewein und ich du. Scheiner weg, jene Jahr, jene Schuh. Wie schnell verflieht der junge Glück, und man kann es nicht haben mehr zurück. Weil was gewein ist gewein und ich du. Die Kräften werden schwach, der Hur wird grau. Man näht sich, man kleidt sich, man macht sich schön. Man naht aber keinem nur sich allein. Weil was gewein ist gewein und ich du.
I know there are many of you online, and I would just like to mention to you and to everyone who is here that you'll be changing your link If you'd like to participate in the interment at Mount Nebo Cemetery, go to Feldman's website, and all of the links, including the link to the Shiva Minyanim, will be there. Shiva will be online Sunday through Thursday at 4:30 p.m. You're welcome to come on any of those days. We always give everyone an opportunity to give condolences to the family. And I can tell you it's an enormous comfort for the family to see you all there and being there for the memory of Ida Garnek. So please rise.
Howard, that's a hard act to follow. El Malerachami Shochein Bameromi Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanefei Ashechina B'malot Kedoshim U'Diorim Kezar Harakia Mazehirim Et Nishmat Italeya Bat Zan V'Vetila Shehalecha Leolama Began Eden Tehei Menuchata Balarachamim Hastireha Beseiter Kenafecha Leolamim Utzeror Bitzeror Achaim Et Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen.
Amalei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Ida Garnek, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at the Hebrew Educational Alliance. We'll have interment at Mount Nebo Memorial Park. You're welcome to join us at the cemetery for interment. We do not have a procession, so there are instructions in your handouts. For those online, we will have that being streamed also. That will be on the Feldman Mortuary YouTube channel, not the Hebrew Educational Alliance. You'll need to go to YouTube, and there is a link on Feldman Mortuary and within the obituary and on the Hebrew Educational Alliance email regarding the announcement of the funeral service. We'll ask you to remain in your places as we escort the family and the casket out, and then if you are going to join us, we'll ask you to start making your way to the cemetery as quickly as possible.